everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn Roundtable to explore solutions for the unprecedented capacity crisis we're facing. I'm Gary Evans, clinic director here, clinic director for the Humane Society of Huron Valley. I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. We are honored to have with us Dr. Julie Levy, the Fran Marino Endowed Distinguished Professor of Shelter Medicine Education, Maggie Shelter Medicine Program, University of Florida, Renee Wolfgramm, Midwest Animal Welfare Director from 24 Pet, and also Tanya Hilgendorf, President and CEO from the Humane Society of Huron Valley and the Vice Chair of the Michigan Pet Alliance. And we'll go ahead and dive into some discussion here. So, Renee, my first question is for you, I guess, and are we really seeing a capacity crisis, or does it just seem that way?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Gary, and thanks to the Michigan Pet Alliance for having us today. Yes, Gary, we do seem to be having a capacity issue in Michigan and nationally. And with that, I'm going to share a few slides and we'll take a closer look at what we're experiencing. All right, so like Gary said, I'm with 24 Pet, and if you're not familiar with us, we provide software solutions for the animal welfare industry, as well as microchip and lost pet tools. So for those of you who are using PetPoint or Chameleon software, you know us well. Other organizations in Michigan who aren't familiar with us, no worries. What we're going to show you today applies to everybody, truly. So what we're going to take a look at are aggregate data from a tool that we have that essentially pulls unidentifiable data from all the organizations on our software tools into one united place. We typically share this in a national view as well as in a census region, but for you guys today, we're going to present it specifically for our Michigan partners. So first off, let's take a quick look at dog intake trends over the last 10 years. We have 41 organizations in this data set. And in looking at this, I know it's a lot to digest quickly, but essentially we've got dog intakes kind of all over the map over the last 10 years, but most notably, we've seen a decline in owner surrenders. For a significant period of time, Michigan organizations were transferring in a lot of dogs, probably not a surprise to most of you. And the stray intakes is interesting. That's kind of bounced all over the place over the last 10 years, but with a bit of an increase in this COVID era. Now, when we look at dog outcomes, great story here. Adoptions certainly leading the way in the main way that dogs are leaving your organizations. And then a phenomenal thing to celebrate here is the decline in euthanasia. And we've had a slight increase in return to owners over time. And then a lot of transferring, I shouldn't say a lot, but we've had some transfer outs over time as well. So to me, that means folks are collaborating a bit, likely within the state. And feel free to throw in the chat or in the Q&A maybe how you guys are seeing with dogs specifically. If your organization is not already managing your data in a system and taking time and energy to report on it and share it with your team, your community, your board of directors, I would highly encourage everybody to do that. I'm sure Tanya is going to speak more to that too. When it comes to cat intakes in Michigan, we've seen a decline in owner guardian surrenders, just like with dogs, but that stray intake has climbed up a bit. Probably not a surprise to most of you. We've seen a bit of transferring in of cats in Michigan, which is again, I think, lending itself to some collaboration. And outcomes of cats, again, adoptions leading the way. And this is truly a phenomenal story that red line of euthanasia has just dropped off drastically for cats. So bravo to all of you guys on the front lines doing all this work. This is a huge celebration that as a state, you should really savor. Now, in this particular view, we're just looking at the last 2 years. So 2021 compared to 2022, this is dogs and cats combined month to month. So Blue bar here is going to be our 2022 data. And as you look through the months, we're generally seeing less intakes throughout our partners, again, using PetPoint and Chameleon. Your organization could have a different story. But that's of note here, as we are taking in less animals than we were last year. Outcomes, it's about the same story. Again, the blue bar is lower than most of the months of last year. And then getting into really the crux of the issues that we're facing in Michigan is really going to be evident on this slide here. So we call days of care essentially just what it is. It's how many days are you actually caring for an animal? And this is dependent or not dependent on an outcome. A lot of organizations look at length of stay. I like days of care a little bit better because it's not waiting for that pet to have an outcome. This is whether or not animals are still in your care or not. So here's really where the problem lies. Steadily since March and April, we have had an increase in days of care, with October now hitting the highest we've seen in 2 years. So animals are staying on average about 60 days. So that is likely some of the pain that you guys are feeling. Again, feel free to put some comments in the chat or in the Q&A. We'd love to hear if you're keeping an eye on this and if this is what you're seeing too. We do know we've got folks on the call from up in the UP down to much more urban areas in Detroit. So every community could be a little bit different, and that's why it's really important for you to take the time to look at this too.
Looks like we're even seeing participants from out of state. So yeah, we would love to get some more information. Well, moving on, Dr. Levy, what are the implications of this capacity crisis? What are the, what does this mean for us, and what do we think is causing it?
Well, there's so many things that are causing it right now that are going into it. There is an increase in intake in many shelters, but I would caution a lot about that particular statistic, because what we're seeing across the country is shelters are closing to routine intake, and they are admitting only emergency intake. And so you can't use intake as a barometer for community need if you are turning people away. And shelters are needing to turn non-emergent cases away because they're so full, and they are fuller than they've been in years. And some shelters are starting to euthanize for space for the first time in years, or more than they have in the past. So it is a complex, scary thing that we'll talk about. It involves a shortage of veterinarians, a vast decrease in the demand for pets from shelters that we've been starting to see for almost a year now. And then, of course, the regional supply and demand imbalances that we have always seen that are maybe exacerbated this year as well. I'm going to take a look at this perspective mostly from the veterinary side of view, the lens, because I work in shelter medicine, and we have seen a veterinary shortage brewing for several years across the entire industry, but especially difficult in animal welfare roles. And it is coming true now, and it's having some very, very significant impacts on all of our operations. So we're looking at this veterinary shortage colliding with this phenomenon of overcrowded shelters in our semi-post-COVID world. So this is an article that actually, if you look at the date, it was 2019, and already the media was picking up on the problem that shelters were having in recruiting veterinarians and keeping their spay-neuter clinics open, and that it was impacting the ability of these organizations to carry out their mission. So it's not new, it's something that's been coming, but it really just was unleashed on all of us during COVID in a very public way. And when I think about what animal welfare organizations need from veterinarians, there's been a surge in need just in our own community. And then, of course, the private practice veterinary community surging as well, with giant increases in the number of clinics and the number of pets that are kept in the United States that is requiring more need. So there's about 5,000 shelters in the United States. We really don't know how many, but a lot of them are building out their shelter medicine programs, hiring their first vet. They're able to increase their life-saving goals, so they're starting to do more medical care, or so that they may be adding more vets and becoming more elaborate in their care as well. And then spay-neuter clinics have for decades been really the cornerstone of our gains in animal welfare. And there's been a surge of these specialized, high quality, high volume spay-neuter clinics that are really essential for controlling populations so we can do all of the other work that we do. And then these clinics also serve rescue groups, shelters, TNR programs, and the public for subsidized care. And then more recently, we've seen a lot of interest in safety net programs that require access to veterinary care. So we're working really hard to keep pets with their families. And a lot of the reasons that that is a struggle is because they can't afford veterinary care. So this, again, requires more veterinarians that are working in these targeted areas. And is currently something that the national funders are very, very interested in to help have more social justice in how pet keeping and veterinary care is distributed. So just to kind of bring you up to date on the national veterinary shortage, there's a lot of information on these slides, and we'll give you a copy so you don't have to take notes. You can just sort of absorb what you can. But just think about it. Our country produces about 2,500 new veterinary graduates a year, hasn't expanded much in decades. There, at the same time, has been a marked increase in the number of practices, the number of pets that are owned, and the higher demand for higher levels of care for pets. And we're also doing more pro bono work and subsidized work. So people who never went to the vet before are now coming in asking for care. Every year there are twice as many positions open as there are job seekers. So just let that soak in. Every year, only half of open jobs across the entire industry will be filled. So there's a shortage impacting everybody. Our new graduates just love this because they have people begging to hire them and rolling out all kinds of lavish incentives. They get to pick from many offers, so they usually get to pick some place they want to live, which is not always where our veterinary care deserts are and where we want them to work. Something to think about is new grads are really pretty insecure and they really want a mentor. So if you're an organization that is a one vet shop, it's going to be hard to recruit a new grad because they're going to be uncomfortable most of the time being alone. So Mars organization owns all of veterinary medicine, almost VCA clinics, Banfield clinics, diagnostic clinics. They're now buying pet placement programs, huge conglomerate. And they have been studying this because if they have a vet shortage, their business is going to be in trouble. So they predict there will be 15,000 vet shortage by 2030. And that is only accounting for the number of people who traditionally go to vets, that those people are not going to find a vet to go to. And if you tried to use a vet during COVID, you know how hard it was and everybody was booked up and you couldn't even get into emergency clinics. So this is a really crisis for the whole field. And as a result of that, being short-staffed and this being a high-pressure job and high student loans and a lot of other things, clients have gotten really mean. Burnout among veterinarians is extremely high. Suicide rate among veterinarians is very high. In a recent poll, 30% of veterinarians regretted choosing this profession. And 25% were actively looking to leave the profession. 25% were considering leaving the profession altogether. So this is just a terrible trajectory. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to give you a happy ending to this. We have not hit bottom yet. And just as significant, or maybe more so, is the burnout rate in veterinary technicians is even higher than in veterinarians. And so we have got to shape up our organizations to take better care of our techs as well, pay them a living wage, and let them work at the top of their license. So what can we do? What are the corporate practices doing? They are raising salaries, giving bonuses, all kinds of benefits. They are really investing, or saying they are trying to invest in good work-life balance and good workplace culture. Veterinarians say one of the drivers of staying in shelter medicine is that they have opportunities for making a difference. They really need to feel like their work is valuable. So we can improve workplace satisfaction, hire more technicians. That was the #1 suggestion of burnt out veterinarians. Get me more staff so I can do my job. And join in this strong emphasis the industry has on wellness and professional development. And I'm going to really focus today a lot also on reducing the conflict between veterinarians and administrators. This is huge. We have our little shelter vet discussion groups, and veterinarians are so frustrated. They do not see eye to eye with their administrators. Doesn't mean the vets are right, but they are not connecting on decision making. They feel disenfranchised. They feel like the welfare of the animals is compromised in many cases, and they're leaving shelter medicine altogether. And this is happening faster than in the past. So we have to address that. So here's what it looks like for a new grad. If you are competing to hire them, these are the stats from corporate practice, which is about half of the practices that are hiring. And it's a little bit lower in private practice, but again, this is what our students are being offered. Brand new student, no experience, over $110,000. Signing bonuses, averaging $28,000. They go up to $100,000 or $200,000. Moving expenses, vacations, health insurance, sick leave, all the licensing and everything. They're going to get this at the for-profit clinics. It is going to be very hard for nonprofits to compete for these veterinarians if they cannot compensate them in an equivalent way. Veterinarians should not have to lose money in order to do nonprofit work. And then you've probably all heard that veterinarians are, they've always had a higher suicide rate than most other professions. It's gotten worse. We're seeing very young people and some shelter vets taking their lives because of their moral distress and other reasons. So we did a survey of veterinarians who either had previously worked in shelter medicine or were currently working. And we just asked them, what are the top 3 things for those who left that made you leave? And what are the top 3 things for those who stayed, why they're still in it? And this is really interesting. And this is like 200 vets altogether responded to this one, 200 vets that were no longer in shelter medicine. #1 reason, relationship with management. Then poor work-life balance, internal turmoil and criticism. Internal conflict was bigger than the Facebook harassment that people get. This is like really important. And then inadequate input on operations. That's huge for vets. They feel sidelined. And then you get into the other things like insufficient pay, outside turmoil from overzealous advocates or whoever it is, and then local reasons or personal reasons. Look at this. The very top reasons that veterinarians are leaving the profession entirely is things that we can control. It is not about the money. So these are some quotes. I won't read them all because you'll get a copy of the slides, but I thought this last one was really good. This was one of our alumni, actually. She said, I was told the first week during a management meeting, everyone in this room is replaceable. Remember that. Worked 2 more years before finding an ED who really does want to make me happy. I felt so much more like myself after I left. Funny thing is, my new ED has no background in animal welfare, but respects my opinions and goals. And that is a common thing for anybody, right? Nobody wants to feel disrespected and undervalued. So then we asked a large number of veterinarians why they're still working in shelter medicine. And look at this. It is just the opposite. Have a good workplace and your vets will stay. So that was the #1 thing. They want to feel like they're making a difference. They feel heard, that their input is valued, and great culture, relationships. Again, most of this is under the control of the organization, not some outside factor. One says she stays for the staff. The techs are what keep her there, even if her management drive her crazy. Another one said, I traded a job with a fancier title, more pay, great benefits, to one that respects me, my time, and my skills as a veterinarian. I preferred the work-life balance to the latter, and I will never see myself leaving because of it. Okay, so what did this do to us? Well, we have this vet shortage that was brewing, and especially in the nonprofit sector, and then COVID came and shut everything down. We did a study of spay neuter volume in high volume clinics through Clinic HQ, which is a software that manages a lot of spay neuter clinics. And what we calculated is during the past 2 years, nearly 3 million surgeries were missed. Those were just never done. If the clinics had been on their previous trends, they would have done 3 million more. So they are, and also the clinics are not back up to their 2019 levels yet. So they haven't even gotten back to 3 years ago levels. But there's also these 3 million animals out there that never got neutered. And what's happening with them now, 2 years later? We could have generations of animals that have been born simply because COVID shut down, and then the clinics couldn't recover, just like everybody else. You know, the new normal is not enough people working, high turnover, all kinds of stress that keeps people from being their best. And so we're seeing that the ongoing workforce shortage of the veterinarians and the staff. Some clinics have vets, but no staff, and so they had to close, or they're working at reduced capacity. Shelters are losing their veterinary workforce, as I've mentioned, and the funders are turning their focus more to access to veterinary care, which is very good if they can find veterinarians, but it is at the expense of spay neuter funding. So all of us who run subsidized spay neuter are really struggling to keep those funded. And so altogether, this means that the conditions are ripe for an increase in unwanted litters and I really believe a reversal of population gains that we've made over the past decade or more. The setbacks we're having now are going to be so hard to recover from. Just the numbers alone, but also the loss of the workforce and the crowding of the shelters. And it's really quite frightening to me. So this is just our local county shelter this summer. They took it, just kept taking in dogs. That was the county policy. I'd take them in, and they tried to divert, but couldn't do much. So they ended up over capacity, had 100 big dogs living in wire crates. And finally, they got advice that this was a disaster waiting to happen, and it was not humane, and it wasn't a good plan because it wasn't working. And so the county did agree to a 2-month shutdown to emergency intake only. And this is hard because there's people who need our help that had to say no. If the animal wasn't injured, wasn't in immediate danger, it couldn't come in. We tried to offer some alternatives, but those aren't really built up in our county yet. And I'm a little proud of the county manager that this was a hard decision, and they knew residents would be calling their elected officials. But she said, I'm ordering the shutdown for the sake of the animals and our staff. We're seeing nationwide staffing shortages. Unfortunately, Alachua County is not immune. And there's recognition of what they were asking, that they were asking too much of the staff. So that was important. Great news is we, in 2 months, got the animals all back to 1 animal per double-sided run, did a lot of adoptions, did not do extra euthanasia to do that. And it reset where we were, and trying to work really hard to hold on to that, but it is not easy. And it's much worse than so many other shelters. You know, there's a sign from Austin Municipal Shelter where they're just closed, you know, except for you've got an emergency, call 311. So common. And this other news story from last month is from one of the Atlanta shelters. So overcrowded, especially with dogs, big dogs. And, you know, this quote is so sad. It's like, everyone is full, beyond full. We are past code red. And I think that's what a lot of people are feeling. This is a veterinarian that went down to Texas to do some spay neuter for a shelter that was behind 2,000 surgeries between their foster to adopts and their foster pets and in shelter animals. They needed 2,000 spay neuters to catch up. And so while she was there, she just walked around the shelter and took pictures of all these puppies. So for those of you who are either saying there's no small breed puppies available for adoption, or who want some, let me know. We can hook you up with some nice Texas dogs. They will come from shelters that are really struggling and have distemper and a lot of other challenges. And that is all just making it hard to save dogs and the people that work in these shelters too. It is nothing but a crisis. You can't describe it any other way. So okay, there's a lay of the land. It's bad. I think it's going to get worse. What are we going to do about it? Because we can't just like have a pity party. We don't have time. So here's all the things, and I'm really going to focus on how you direct and target your veterinary resources. So if you don't have enough veterinarians to do the work that you want to do or that you've done in the past for your community and for the shelter, there's all these things that are important. And we've been building up these programs, spay neuter for the public, your sick and injured animals in the shelter, your preventive care in the shelter, make sure they don't get sick, public vaccine clinics, TNR cruelty, making sure you notice disease in your shelter, neuter before adoption, foster pets, like all of it, super critical, but we can't do it all. So what are we going to cut? Here is how I think about it. And this is hard because I believe in all of these programs and I've built them myself and I'm very attached to them. I believe when it really comes down to not having enough, the animals that you own are your primary responsibility. The animals in your shelter should get the care they need before you start offering care to the community. I just don't see how we can have cruel, unhealthy conditions in our shelter and then be offering microchip clinics and things. So this is the way I would look at it. Number one priority, sick, injured, cruelty cases in your shelter or ones that you have to respond to in the community. Making sure all your preventive care and processing to get animals protected and through your shelter system and out the door as quickly as possible. You saw that data where length of stay is shooting up, and that is a big reason for all of the other problems. We need to figure out what all the barriers to getting animals out quickly, what the wasted animal care days are, and eliminate them. And don't forget about your foster pets, because they can go out there when you've got hundreds out there. It's easy to lose track of them when you're super busy. And we need to turn over that foster space as well. So then we need to triage and hopefully develop some community support or hire per diems or whatever it's going to take to work on the public animals. So that would be your safety net services that keep animals out of the shelter. Maybe start with TNR of the most high-risk cats, like those big populations that are causing a lot of complaints. TNR those, if you only have a little bit of TNR capacity. And then the more general public services that we've worked so hard to build up. Public spay neuter, massive TNR, vaccination, microchipping clinics. That's how I would pick where I in charge of the world. So then let's look at just spay neuter capacity and how we are going to prioritize that. I like that the shelters are doing these little like risk levels, like fire danger things, and nobody who has their guillotine doors down should have anything but critical dangerously full. That housing is designed for humane housing. When you exceed it, and you have to start putting multiple unrelated dogs in a run or drop the doors down so they can't go back and forth, you're over capacity. And so I advise shelters and spay neuter clinics, when you can't do it all, is to really take a hard look at who is at highest risk of in your population. And I say females. When you do population management research, the only thing you put into the models is females. The males really don't matter because there's always going to be a male for a free roaming dog or cat. So prioritize females. They're the ones that get pregnant. Prioritize community cats because very few are neutered and they breed continuously. And you might not see all those kittens because a majority of them will die before adulthood, but that's a lot of suffering and a lot of preventable death. So those need to be high on the list for your existing spay neuter capacity. And then the animals that are at risk for shelter intake and have poor outcomes if they are in the shelter would be right now your medium and large dogs. Like that seems to be what people are really struggling with, finding something to do with. And like this is a shelter with multiple dogs in a run. And if we could neuter more medium and large dogs and have fewer of those puppies coming in, that would help a lot. This does mean, though, that I think we should look at changing the pricing structure of our clinics. We should not say the easiest surgery, which is a male neuter, is the cheapest one, and that males, which are easier to neuter than females are, should be cheaper, because the males don't matter. We really should be saying it is cheaper to bring your large female dog in than a male cat. Like if you want to control population and the animals most at risk for not having a good outcome, that would be the approach. And then here I put a little barf sign, just so you know, I don't say this cavalierly, but we need to place intact animals with adoption contracts if the alternative is keeping them extra days in the shelter waiting for a spay-neuter appointment. I know that hurts me, it hurts other people even more, but knowing what happens when we overcrowd our shelters and lead to euthanasia because of that is not worth the risk of putting them out with spay-neuter contracts, which we know are not perfect, but it is better than crowding shelters. And I'm hoping at the end we'll have time to discuss that, because I think that's probably the biggest pain point that I see on the discussions. So just to drill into that a tiny bit deeper is when it's scared, we only have so much time to do spay-neuter and we can't do everything we would like to or that we did in the past, who can we put that on to make the biggest difference? And this is a chart that shows all the cats in the United States. So you will see that pet cats, well, this is all the free roaming cats in the United States. So of all the free roaming cats, about a third of them are pets that go outside and 80% of them are neutered. So that is not low hanging fruit. There are 2/3 of the cats that are free roaming unowned cats, and those are mostly intact and they reproduce. That is why we need to put our spay-neuter resources on them. And then when we talk about the conflict about letting a cat go without spaying it before it leaves the shelter, look how many cats we're focusing on. That tiny little yellow line, 1.6 million, is the number of cats that get out of shelters alive. If we choke our shelter system because we insist that we never let an intact animal out of our hands, we are focusing on the minutia and not the big picture. I did want to end on what I think is a fun and hopeful thing. We are starting to see these sort of pop-up clinics come where shelters that are behind can have an external vet team come in, and these are pros. It's a big team and they just power through hundreds of animals a day. And so they help shelters catch up. It's not a durable fix. So shelters need to also work on something more sustainable, but this will get them out of their spay-neuter crisis. And so this, what I love is Ed Jamison, who used to be the director at Dallas Animal Services. He is now at Operation Kindness, a nonprofit in the same area. And he organized this team to go down to El Paso for a whole week. And they have a few teams in sequence that are going to go, and they're going to catch up on those 2,000 spays and neuters that they're behind on. And this is one fix. There are a variety of people that are offering this, but I loved his philosophy about the collaboration. He said, when I came over to the nonprofit side of animal welfare, I promised myself that we were going to be the type of partner I desperately needed while I was in government. I don't need to tell you that access to veterinary services, even very basic services, have become the biggest barrier to life saving in the shelters and keeping pets with their people in the neighborhood. So looking forward to hearing more from Ed and his creativity for solving some of these problems. Thank you.
That's a lot of very sobering information, although I do take some heart in at least some of the things. I say that our experience supports your ability about really leveraging the things that are within the control and leveraging what excites veterinarians in particular about wanting to be in the profession they are. But moving on from some of those, really appreciated some of both the challenges and some practical advice moving forward. And I'm going to move on, Tanya, to you now, because I know that Humane Society of Huron Valley is having some success continuing, to keep our population moving. And I'd love to hear your take about what shelters should be thinking about to cope with capacity issues, and what you think can be done to keep things on track.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. Let's see if I can get this moving. It's a pleasure to be talking to everybody today. We definitely have seen very similarly. We had our biggest kitten intake month in August since 2007, basically before we started TNR, which was pretty staggering, and also seeing almost a doubling of length of stay for our dogs, and seeing some more behavior problems. So I'm pretty excited to be talking to everybody today. about some possible solutions, hoping that there'll be some nuggets here that will be helpful. Unfortunately, no magic wands, of course, but we want to be searching for that low-hanging proverbial fruit, right? What might be easiest to do, but also intersects with impact, right? How can we get the biggest bang for our buck? Just a quick note about change management. I think as Dr. Levy sort of mentioned, it takes courage, right? We got to take risks and try again and be ready to face some naysayers and that social media mob. Consider when we talk about capacity, think about a capacity committee in your organization that looks at new ideas. When we're looking at life-affirming solutions, it can be really energizing and really help with compassion fatigue. So important. And let's make sure we're using our internal data, as Renee mentioned, because when you measure, you can show results to your staff and volunteers and really celebrate, which is so important. So we have basically two options in our shelters and in our rescues. So we either, or both, we move them out faster and we work to prevent them from coming in the first place. So let's talk about how we can decrease length of stay. So I love the phrase, no wasted day. That's how we manage flow. It's just incredibly important mindset and mantra that requires the whole team and is also really important for animal welfare in general. But thinking in terms of rounds, what do you need today to get to a positive outcome? Every day we should be thinking and talking about every single animal as individuals and what they might need to get them to move. We only have, 5 possible outcomes: return to owner, return to field, adoptions, euthanasia, transfer, right? So sadly, when we think about getting that animal to whatever outcome, some more in our control than others, getting them there as quickly as possible. So even though very sadly, that outcome might be euthanasia, but when it is decided, even though it's hard and sad, do it, right? Because it doesn't serve the animal in any way to sit and wait. Try fast track adoption. So think about how you can move your easier animals, your healthy, your happy, those with quote unquote more curb appeal, how you can move them through your system faster. What steps can you skip so you can get them straight to adoption and they can get out very quickly. Allowing people to test run animals is an incredible technique, I think. I think many of us take advantage of this when we work in rescues and shelters. So trial runs. Here we have pajama parties. So we let animals go home for a few days for folks to try them out. They usually end up very successful. And when they don't, when the animals aren't adopted, we have an incredible amount of information on that animal to help them get adopted. So there's no loss there. And Dr. Levy already talked about prioritization of spay and neuter. But what we really want to do is, focus our resources on the animals that need them most, right? And get the other ones out quickly. In terms of days of care, Renee talked about this. Incredibly important to monitor days of care. And I would say even average length of stay. We don't want to, anecdotes and feelings is data. It's one kind of data, but we want to look at a bigger data set to see where our trends and delays may be. Here we do use PetPoint and they have fantastic reports. And we manage our flow of animals through stages. And so we can see at any stage while they're here, if there's some sort of delay or we're not meeting our goals. So a stage might be waiting for spay neuter. And typically we want to see that be a half a day or a day. And if that gets longer, we need to take stock and see what's happening here. Where is the delay coming from? And if you don't know how to run these kinds of reports, your shelter management representative is an incredible resource for this. Also consider a flow manager. I'm not talking about, you have to have a whole position. Flow is a team sport, all right? But it needs a coach. It needs someone making sure decisions get made and actions get taken quickly, so animals don't linger in your care. When we talk about moving animals out, great customer service, so critical, right? We want to be taking care of our people too, staff and our volunteers and our customers, right? So customer service is the way we get more people in the door. We want to fling open the adoption door, right? Open. And we want to be welcoming and friendly to everybody. We want to be careful that we're checking our cultural and racial biases so that we're being inclusive and always being helpful so that people can find the animals they're looking for. But everybody who comes through your door should be treated with friendliness, enthusiasm, and great big gratitude for coming in to adopt, because adopting should be a joyous and fun experience, but we got to give people help because it can be overwhelming. And we want to be prompt, right? There was a study done several years ago that showed that animal shelters aren't answering their phones. And I know we have a staffing shortage, but something to think about in terms of priority, because if you're not returning phone calls or answering your phone, you're definitely losing out on some customers and some adopters. And of course, always apply the golden rule. I say, always think about how would you like to be treated as a customer? And I think one big piece of some of our challenges is related to convenience. Convenience is big. Adoptions is essentially retail. We don't like that, but it's sales. Obviously, we deeply value our animals' lives, but this is a product we're selling. And we know a lot of shelters pulled back during COVID and are continuing to struggle with staffing, but many of these practices in pulling back shouldn't be our new normal, right? Because we were used to animals flying out the door for adoptions and seeing a decline in intakes, but now we've got to get back to making sure people can get in. So our doors shouldn't be locked, literally or metaphorically, right? Appointments have their place, but they can also be a barrier. Remember, people want to see the animals. That's how they fall in love, right? And that's how they adopt, sometimes accidentally. So we really want people to be able to get in and see those animals. Think about mobile events and meeting people where they're at. Get out in the community with your animals. But the caveat is, don't forget fear-free. Bringing cats to a busy store where they are wide-eyed, terrified, hiding in the corner of their litter box is cruel, right? And it's a very bad example for the public. So when you're applying doing mobile events, remember your fear-free practices. We also want to be thinking about who we're competing with, as you can see here. For cats, we're probably competing with other shelters and rescues and maybe the neighbor down the street with a litter of kittens. For dogs, we're also competing with pet stores and online dealers and breeders. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of doodles in this community. So we really need to be thinking about how we're competing, and weekend hours, evening hours are critical. That's when most of our adoptions happen. So really important to be thinking about your hours of operation. Again, I know it's a staffing issue, but really important. And also, again, about convenience. You see puppyspot.com, they're going to deliver that puppy right to your door. And I don't know about you all, but I will definitely pay more for convenience. It's really, really important. So just consider how you are competing right? And think about your market share and what you can do to increase your market share, whether that's prices, advertising, and continuing to talk to the public about doing good. I think we had a lot of conversation years ago about promoting adoptions, adopt, don't shop, but I think those messages have been muted a little bit. So we need to keep talking about that. Conversational adoptions, I'm not going to go deep into this. We've got a webinar coming up on this, but really critical. How do we get to that yes? That yes doesn't mean an 80-year-old woman gets a 1-year-old husky because she thinks that dog is beautiful. It means instead of lengthy forms and being quizzed and questioned, it's really about a conversation. What do you want? And what fits your lifestyle? What internal and external resources do you have? And how do we make great matches between people and animals by knowing both? And we want a really judgment-free zone. A lot of people still avoid shelters and rescues because they're afraid they're going to be judged. And so it's really important, just take on the attitude that we're all learning, we're all on a journey, we're all trying to get better, and our job is to educate. And if people feel judged, they're not going to learn, right? And they're not going to want to deal with us. This includes returns. I think that is incredibly important. Of course, it's really sad when an adoption doesn't work out, but we don't want people keeping animals they can't care for or don't love, right? So if a family with 4 rowdy kids adopts a shy cat and that cat ends up under the bed, please and thank you in returning that animal, right? Because we want to place that animal in a home where she fits, and we want that family to have a companion that they're really going to enjoy. So we want to treat every animal and every person as an individual. And again, look at possible barriers, get rid of lengthy applications, outdated blanket policies that no longer make sense. We know as an industry, we're really short on time and big on emotion. So we do tend to cling to rules that soothe our anxieties and give us a false sense of control, but they often aren't effective and they tend to turn people off. Nobody in the world likes red tape. Nobody. And we think about bans on pets as gifts, still doing landlord checks, afraid of free adoption. We know the data shows there is no difference in adopter retention or attachment level. So that's really great news. So we want to be sure we're creating a climate of trust with our community, so that we're thinking of people who are coming through our doors or reaching out to us. They have good intentions, right? We don't want to be looking at everybody with that whale eye. Marketing, people are doing a fantastic job with great photos and videos, because I think people really understand that adoptions is retail. In terms of social media, Facebook is still the dominant source, but Instagram is where young people are. And I hear of some people doing some really cool stuff with TikTok. So maybe they can do a webinar for us. But I do want to stress that most people are looking at your website on their phones. So it is critical that you have a mobile-friendly website. Otherwise, you're just missing folks. Again, thinking convenience and ease. Now, let me just jump into that prevention model. When we talk about the home they already have, right? So not everybody here today takes strays or lost animals, but as our county's stray hold facility, I always say our first job is to get them back to the home they already have. We know that our industry's return to owner rate is pretty abysmal, but many of the outcomes there are under our control. We can really dramatically increase rates with more attention. Again, going back to easy, convenient. Our lost report. Can I call and make a lost report? Can I make a lost report on your website? Can I see the strays in your facility online? Or do I have to come in every day like it's 1982, right? How do we make it more convenient for people? Educate on how to find lost pets, really critical. We have a ton of information on our website that you can all steal, particularly critical for cats, because cats don't get lost and found the way dogs do. Make sure your ACOs are carrying scanners in their vehicles. They're knocking on doors. They've got the directive, return that animal directly home. You don't have to bring it to the shelter. So those are some really, sorry, I keep doing that, really important strategies. And of course, microchip. Again, thinking about prevention, that community work, how we get them back to the home or keep them in the home they already have, that One Health perspective. We've been hearing a lot about that, different names for it, HOS or socially conscious sheltering, but HSUS has been calling it Pets for Life for decades, so it's not really new. For me, as a former social worker, I see this as social work. It's where we focus on support, education, and building relationships with the community. So we're keeping families together. What can we do to keep that animal in the home so they never need our shelter, right? A win for people, animals, the community, and the shelter. Just thinking a minute about this. Of course, we all need to help each other as shelters and rescues, but the model of trying to take all the homeless pets in an underserved community and shifting them to a better resourced community only creates a vacuum, right? And then in that community, and similar to catch and kill, right? That those animals will just be replaced and that cycle will continue. It's just, we need to help each other out, but that is not a sustainable answer. So I don't mean keeping animals in abusive homes or the litters of puppies and kitties that definitely need their first homes. I just mean those pets that could have been reunited or just stay in the loving home that they already have. Of course, this takes a village, right? We're all working together. We need to work together on this. But I also want to just mention, of course, if we hit crisis, we understand those are unique needs, but there have been some trends, and sometimes I think the pendulums can swing a little too far and maybe stop making sense and could lead to more suffering. So if we can, we shouldn't be rejecting animals in need because a national group or an expensive consultant with no skin in the game told us we don't have to take in strays, or we should just let the community figure it out. That's not really an answer, right? We should be as proactive as possible, supporting the community to take good care of their animals, not just being reactive, right? But being proactive, trying to get to those root problems that strengthen the whole fabric of the community. And I don't want to leave this slide without saying TNR, right? Such a critical part of our community work. Every community should be doing TNR. So you're keeping those outdoor kitties in the outdoor homes they already have, right? And we're preventing increased population and suffering. And here's just a recent idea that we tried with some pretty good success. This is on our website. We do private rehoming. So the animal never has to come into the shelter. We started it in 2020, and owners can present their animal with their own information and look for an adopter while the animal stays home with them. But they leverage our technology and the 18,000 hits we get on our website a week. And you see people who care deeply about their animals and really know their animals best and what kind of homes they belong in. And through this service since 2020, we've adopted out, or the community has readopted 650 animals, all animals that have stayed out of our shelter. So That's it for me, Gary. Some good news, some ideas that I hope might be helpful.
I love it. And some very practical advice, which I think is what we really need right now, to really get on top of this. So I know that we are running a little behind, and some of you may well have to go. We're getting towards the end of the hour that we have scheduled. I know our presenters are happy to stick around for a little bit. If you do have some questions still that you'd like to ask, I know we'd love to continue the conversation. I'm probably just going to dive in here, and we'll just throw some questions out. And again, feel free to keep asking them and stick around as long as you can. And if you do need to leave, know that this will be part of the recording that we do when it comes to you can look at it later. So the first question that we have, and actually maybe Tanya, just not to go straight back to you, you probably could use a break after chatting, but this one seems relevant to you, the first one on the list. Somebody has asked, thoughts on Michigan shelters taking in dogs from out-of-state shelters. How does this help how does it help bringing more animals into the state that already has too many pets?
I think that's a pretty complicated question. So when you think about what are the animals in need in our community, and focusing on those in our community, I think that's pretty critical. Now, we do transfer in puppies from out of state, but to me, the win there is it keeps people out of pet stores and reduces the demand for puppy mills because people do want puppies. It brings attention to the other animals in our shelter, and it gets puppies adopted. People are always going to want puppies. And I know in this community and many communities, it's easy to go online and buy a puppy. I think transfer is a complicated issue, and you need to think about a type of animal. So with a puppy, their length of stay here, 2 days.
That makes perfect.
If I take an animal similar to the other community animals here, their length of stay might be 3 months. It's a significant difference in space and time and investment.
That makes perfect sense. Well, Dr. Levy, maybe I'll go. I'm going to throw another question out, and maybe I'll have you take this one. But does it make sense in your mind for shelters to be putting, ill or injured pets up for adoption? The quote goes on to say that they have seen a lot of success finding adopters with medical backgrounds or otherwise heavy reasons that they don't have issues giving animal meds and nursing them back to health if given the opportunity. What do you think of that sentiment?
Yeah, I totally agree. It needs to be savvy. You can't just hand animals out to anybody, or you could cause more suffering. And so the proper veterinary oversight, but the best place to heal is in a home. I feel like we would take care of our own sick and injured pets. And there's so many protocols now for shelters like outpatient parvo treatment, ringworm treatment that people are doing in foster homes. And so absolutely, I think we should do more of that and just make sure it's really structured and supported appropriately.
Okay, the next question that has been served up for us, and I don't know who would like to address this one. Renee, maybe feel free to jump in, or again, Dr. Levy, this might be one that you want to address again. But are there opportunities for legislative solutions to the vet shortage? What about getting more telemedicine, more services that can be performed by non-vets? Should we be working more together as one voice and one community to push for legislative changes?
Yeah, 1000%. A very hot topic right now. There are 3 things that, know that this giant company Mars that owns Banfield and all these hundreds of all these big corporate chains are looking down and saying, nobody's going to work in our shelter, in our clinics. This is huge. So they have an amazing lobbying voice, and they are really the money and the power behind these efforts to increase veterinary capacity. And so one is with telemedicine, and telemedicine involves like the veterinarian. So that's the part of telehealth that is restricted to veterinarians, which is diagnosis, prescription, and prognosis. I think like that's what only we can do. And you can do a lot of that over the internet, like you do with your doctor, and it became much bigger with COVID. Like there was a lot of telemedicine, it went really great. And the one thing is, in many states, you cannot have that first visit be with telemedicine. So that is the sort of protectionist thing to fight telemedicine, to say, you got to bring your pet in to have a visit with us. Well, that's great because you can't get appointments for months. If you have a feral cat that you want to give a flea treatment to, no vet wants to see those. And even if you're just like between vets, you moved from one state to another and you need to refill heartworm, that new vet can't do it. The old vet's not licensed there. They cannot do it. And then we talked about fear-free. And one of the things we know is there's many animals that are very traumatized by going into a visit. So maybe they wouldn't have to, especially cats. Maybe they could get more care if their care could start with telemedicine. And then also we know that very stressed animals do better and should have medication given at home, so they are chill when they get to the clinic. And if this is the first visit by that animal to a new vet, they can't get that. They have to suffer and go have that in. So that's my harangue. I could take the rest of the time haranguing about this, but doctors can do it. And there's a cute graphic that shows a doctor can take care of a baby by telemedicine, but a vet can't take care of a hamster. You know, they're both nonverbal. They both, you can video that, whatever. So there is no reason veterinarians should not have the same rights to act responsible and be held accountable for their telemedicine choices. You can probably guess maybe one reason why there is so much objection by organized veterinary medicine. And I really think it's all about the online pharmacies. Like, we know it will happen that there will be a vet sitting in the Shui office, or maybe sitting in Thailand or something, calling in prescriptions for heartworm after some like fake telemedicine thing. And that's unethical. It's huge business, is going to hurt people. It is going to happen. So that's their problem to solve. Our problem is to solve delivery of healthcare. And the rules were relaxed during COVID. It worked just great. We need to expand it. So telemedicine was one. The other one is these mid-level practitioners. So as you know, in human medicine, there's nurse practitioners and physician assistants, and they actually can do some of those things. Like, I have been to a doctor. I have been to one of them, never saw an MD, and they talk to me usually more than an MD does, and checks me out, and they write a prescription and they do the follow-up. That we could import into veterinary medicine as well. There's actually a master's program right now, just started this summer at Lincoln Memorial University in Tennessee, that is enrolling people that would be trained to do this. Of course, there's no legal route for them. There's no licensing route. So it's kind of a chicken or an egg thing. Do you train the people first and then make a licensing path? Or, they just decided we're not going to make any progress if we wait for the state boards to act. So they're training. One good thing about shelters, unless loopholes are closed, is most state practice acts allow the owner of an animal to do whatever they want to their animal as long as it's not cruel. So shelters that own their animals can have their non-veterinary staff, in theory, do surgery, do, whatever. And so I imagine, I know I could train a pack of good techs to spay cats, and I would be just like in the middle of the room, kind of there, ready for a problem if it occurred, but my skilled team would be increasing my capacity to do this work, or minor health things and everything. So I think that's where we will see this first, is in animal shelters, because they own the animals. So it's a little different than the public. And then the other one, it's mid-levels, telemedicine. Oh, someone help me on the third tool. Someone brought up. Anyway, there's one other thing that the lobbyists, very skilled lobbyists, are working on, lobbying the legislators, which are ultimately the ones that, like someone was saying, should we lobby ABMA? Don't bother. They're not going to get on board. They don't have any decision-making power anyway, but they lobby. So we need bigger and better lobbyists. So the ASPCA is really leading this. And so connect with them. I put a bunch of links in the chat. And then finally, though, like Mark Cushing and his company are the big lobbyists that are doing this. He's a very powerful man, very effective, very connected. he is also separately lobbying on behalf of puppy mills to rebrand them. And in fact, PJAC just literally rebranded, it has a new name now. And they are getting a lot of animal welfare organizations on board with the concept of this dog shortage. Like, there was too much spay neuter, there's 8 million dog shortage, dogs are being imported. We need to get rid of the puppy mills and have good commercial breeders. And they have a certification thing that they will put on them. So keep an eye out for that as well. I think that's a threat to us. And if nothing else, it's very demoralizing to hear people come to meetings and say there's a dog shortage and there was too much spay neuter. And I think they're being very influential as well, because they have a lot of money and they are strategically pulling in animal welfare support for it. So make sure we don't get manipulated by that.
Answer. That certainly matches a lot of what you said, matches really closely with some of our experiences and some of the challenges we're facing. In Michigan, one of the things, unless it's just changed recently, we actually are one of the very few places where you're able to establish a vet client patient relationship via telemedicine.
Oh, yeah, look at you.
Yeah, but the logistical challenges of figuring out how to make that work are still really challenging for us. But it's certainly a very interesting opportunity, particularly, for very specific use cases. I do want to bring Renee.
Protect that right too, because I could imagine that there's some folks wanting to eliminate that, especially since it's a model that might be working. And so keep an eye on what's happening with your Practice Act.
Have seen some attempts already to perhaps chip away at that a little bit. Renee, I do want to get you I want to ask you a question regarding transferring in puppies. And I'm just reading the question, but then I'll sort of kind of frame it at the end. But regarding transferring in puppies, how does it bring attention to the other animals in the shelter? We are flooded with pit bulls. They aren't moving. People want smaller breed dogs. I'm curious, you started the presentation with some really excellent data, and I'm curious if you have seen, I think we've all heard this anecdotally, that small dogs are easier to get rid of than big dogs, or certain breeds are easier than others. Do we have any data that supports this, that shows that that's true, or perhaps questions it?
Yeah, actually, our software VP has a blog, and he did take a look at the data around large dogs, and it absolutely is the case that it's the larger dogs are staying longer. But I think Tanya touched on in her presentation that getting those folks in the door and having those conversational adoptions can help maybe shape a discussion to lead folks maybe to making a different choice, maybe a better fit. I personally believe, again, having worked at Huron Valley and embodying a lot of these philosophies, that just having people come in the door and meet with that animal face to face, maybe they come in thinking that a puppy is going to be a good fit, but once they lock eyes with another dog, I think it's going to go a long way. So again, just opening your doors and being open to conversations. Tanya might have more to add to that.
Well,
I also, there's a program that Jacksonville Humane Society has that I really like. They have a long stay task force, and it's like a toolkit. So you can get all their documents and their scripts and the programming of their computer. It's very automated, largely staffed by volunteers, in addition to staff, and there's triggers. So like at 30 days, something happens, people are alerted. They have a series of things they're supposed to go through, like move them to the better cages, and I don't know what all it is. And then it gets more significant effort as the time goes on. And it has really improved their length of stay just by being like situationally aware, not letting these slip through when they do.
That makes great sense, and it seems like it would be a great way to keep sort of the spotlight on and to keep some mechanisms to just make sure, to Tanya's point from earlier, that not a day is wasted. Tanya, actually, I'm going to throw this question to you. This comes from somebody who probably is not the CEO of a program, but it is a great question. Any tips on how to convince leadership to reopen shelter doors, or get rid of closing at 4 p.m. or appointment only, focus more on weekends? How would you suggest people go about trying to take that idea up the ladder so that they can start to make those impactful changes?
I think talking, that's all we got. That's all we got as an answer. Go to the door, make your appointment, make your point, make it over and over and over again. I think we've been a little too protectionist and cautious, and this is the time where we have to be brave and take risks. And to me, everybody has the capability of being a leader. If you have an opinion or an idea, bring it forward. It's also your responsibility to bring it forward because you care about the animals. And so it is just as much, it's everybody's responsibility, not just the CEO. So I really encourage you, maybe ask them to watch this video or webinar.
That's a great idea. And actually, Renee, to go back to you, do we have any data that supports that, that highlights that, how popular adoption weekends are, or is there, or evenings? Is there any way to sort of quantify the value of this that we know of right now?
That's a great question, Gary. I don't think we've had anybody ask us to drill down into day of the week and time, but I will absolutely put that forward and see what we can do. It's a great idea.
I actually heard from somebody who really loves manipulating his data and getting the most out of it. And he was able to look at the time of adoptions that were completed. And he was able to say that there was a certain time of day when they really didn't see very many adoptions. And so there is this push-pull of having a lot of parade of people through all the time, and it gets the dogs riled up and there's a lot of stress versus some quiet time and the picking an animal and meeting that one. Personally, I would not want to have to pick it and then walk around with the person. I shop, like, I don't want the salesperson around. I want to walk around the whole mall and then make my short list. So that appointment system or meeting someone in a foster home wouldn't work for me at all. I want to roam. And so I think you could blend what we learned from COVID about the dogs like it when nobody's in the shelter is say, have some free time hours that are your busy hours, have some lockdown doggy rest time, like a break in the middle of the day where they can just chill and people aren't walking through, and then have appointments for people who like that, who want more of a concierge experience. And then for people who are, because our local shelter went through this where they got into a thing about there could only be people had to sit in the lobby, look at pictures and pick 3 dogs, and that's all they could meet that would be brought to them. And so our students once a year have a big adopt-a-thon event, and we're like, well, we can't do that during the adopt-a-thon event, so we need to just open the doors and let everybody in. And it was so successful. Like, there just was a line of people out there waiting when it opened, and people went all over and they adopted a whole bunch of animals. So also just creating sort of those experiments that aren't a commitment, but are likely to be successful to get people over the hump. I think one thing to remember is practically in many shelters, the entire staff is new. They weren't there during the old days, the pre-times. And so this is all they know is sort of a semi-shutdown mode. And some shelters really lack enough staff to even process adoptions. So then they need to think about, well, can volunteers do that? Well, what can we do if we don't have enough people to open the doors?
Well, we've got just a couple of quick questions left. I'm just going to dive, into those, just really 2 of them. And this one, I am just going to read verbatim. I suspect you will all have strong opinions on it, but I'm just going to read it as it stands. I think we all need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is no kill. Any thoughts on data? Any thoughts or data on the impact that no kill has on the length of stay and shelter capacity issues? I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
I'm happy to, but I don't want to hog the floor since I talk a lot. So you guys can go first.
Renee, is there any data on this? This might be very hard to quantify, but maybe just to start there, have you seen any data on this?
So, as we mentioned in the beginning, every organization can pull their data and look at their data independently, and we would encourage everybody to absolutely do that. But every organization does track things a little differently, of course, in their database setup. So no, we're not seeing an increase in euthanasia, if that's what you're asking. It has remained low. So folks are striving towards that no-kill operation philosophy. But again, every organization should evaluate their own capacity and their needs in their community.
Tanya, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Humane Society of Huron Valley's position on this.
I'm not entirely sure what the question meant. So
I may be misreading it. I think that what the questioner is trying to ask, would not being no kill be part of a solution for reducing stay? So
well,
that's how I'm reading it. Their question.
okay, so it could be, right? It depends on your values. If you decide you're going to handle your population by increasing death in your shelter, obviously that is a solution some people take. My particular value is that our job here is to value every single life, and that we should only use euthanasia when euthanasia is required for health or behavior. So if the animal is dying or dangerous, and we need to look to other solutions. I know there is a concern that no kill is warehousing, but that isn't the same thing. So warehousing is about how you're caring for your animals. It's not about your decision about who needs to be euthanized or who can be adopted out. It's about your animal welfare in your shelter and how you manage that, right? So that's through sometimes managed intakes. It's managed by supporting the community and keeping out animals that don't need your care, and focusing primarily on the ones that do need your care. So that's my particular value. I believe in no kill for healthy and treatable animals, and I think it's an important change that we've seen in our state, that we're saving so many more animals.
I do know, as somebody who works in this field, that we talked earlier about the issues of keeping help and keeping staff energized and feeling positive, and some of those things that are in our control to keep staff. It certainly would have I feel, an incredibly demoralizing impact on that. It would certainly feel very counterintuitive to what we are trying to do. Dr. Levy, did you have anything you want to add to that, or shall I move on to the last question?
No, I think this is a really important topic to pause on, because it is polarizing. And I think one of the comments from one of the Sarahs was that no kill is not warehousing. However, no kill can, like groups that think that are not very well organized, can very well end up warehousing, and then and then animals deteriorate. Then you have even more behavioral animals. And so I would actually like to start losing that term, because I think it served its purpose for a couple decades, got us to where we are now. And now I think using the term no kill, even though the public really thinks they understand it, I think it's starting to separate us again, rather than pulling us all together on strategy. The same with Save Them All, and Haas, even, like, to some people, is really just gives them a negative vibe, when really we are talking about saving all the healthy and treatable animals. We need to be so much better about identifying a bigger menu of options, because a lot of times it's come down to, well, do you want to warehouse the animals or euthanize? Like that, there are a lot of options in between. And also we need to be quicker for decision making. Like, those wasted animal care days are devastating to creating shelter crowding. Or if an animal is to be euthanized for behavior or whatever, it should be a process that we work through quickly, rather than keeping that animal for 6 months in uncomfortable conditions and then euthanizing the poor thing. So just identifying pathways faster and working them faster would lead to, more likely to lead to, staying in capacity for care, having healthy animals, having a place that's fun to work so your staff stays there, your community loves you, and the animals are getting the outcomes they need. And sometimes that outcome is euthanasia, and that that could be a hard decision too, especially around behavior. And the good thing about cats is there's almost always a solution of some kind for cats. Like they go into a home, they go to a barn, they go back where they came from. It is definitely the medium and big dogs right now that are there's, especially if they don't like other dogs. Like that is really tough nut to crack. I did want to say one thing about improving return to owner, because that's a huge one. We are really missing opportunity there. There is a little police department in Florida. We were touring once. They said they had a 70% return to owner rate for dogs. And like in Florida, that's amazing. Like, what? Tell us why. They have this greatest thing. They have a lifetime license for $5 if your pet is neutered and microchipped. They have separated licensing from rabies. They said that's a different regulation. And our goal with our licensing program is to know where every dog lives. And I just talk about removing barriers, and half of those animals are returned in the field. They never even see the shelter. Great things can happen.
Fantastic. Well, it's about 1:24. We have one last question, and it's not necessarily a super small one, but I'm going to throw it out there and see if anybody wants to hit it before we wrap out. It is about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is TNR. And this is I'm just going to read that. I'll do my best to paraphrase it, but in essence, I think the question is asking, what are the most convincing arguments to put resources towards TNR? The writers suggest they're seeing the opposite. TNR capacity is the first to get cut. And another problem they suggest is that TNR is more expensive to offer since rates are so reduced versus public shelter pets. Seems spay-neuter clinics need more TNR funding, so TNR isn't the first. I apologize. I think I misread this question. I should have just tried to read it verbatim. What are the most convincing arguments to spay-neuter clinics to put more focus on TNR surgeries? I think I can just leave it there. Tanya, I know you care deeply about TNR too. Do you have anything that you want to throw in here?
I think TNR is critical, but I'm guessing Dr. Levy has some data about effectiveness, that it works, how it keeps animals out of our shelter.
We have a lot of papers that, I showed you the pie chart, like that's your breeding population. There's other studies that show that 50 to 75% of the kittens born die of starvation, trauma, disease, whatever, before they reach adulthood. So horrible suffering that we could eliminate, but we don't see it, so it's not like high on our minds. It happens out in the woods. And the other thing was, I can tell you why it gets cut. One reason is what the writer said about the fiscal model. Low cost spay neuter clinics especially have a fiscal model where some surgeries pay for other ones. And if you do really cheap surgery, the cats, like you can't make enough money on low cost cat surgery to keep the doors open. So that program got cut in a lot of spay neuter clinics during COVID. Also, what's very sad is just to bring dollars in, these clinics often gave up some days of spay neuter and put preventive care instead, because that brings in money. Vaccines and heartworm prevention brings in money. So I think we really just have to look at what's the suffering. If that's what you want to eliminate the suffering, that TNR is going to do the most for that. I want to share one more program that I just love. It is Operation Catnip. That's our local spay neuter clinic. They do about 5,000 cats a year here in Gainesville. We still have lots of kittens every year. You got to keep at it. And but what we noticed is TNR is great for adults. That's where they usually belong. It's not so great for kittens because like a lot of them die. They come in really unthrifty. Like they would be better going to a home, but hopefully not through a shelter, but to a home directly. So they developed a program called the Kitten Shelter Diversion Program, where all the public with their stray kittens can bring them into Operation Catnip. They get all their free veterinary care. And a lot of them they're really sick. Like when they started seeing them, they did not expect to be taking out eyes and taking off limbs on 5-week-old kittens, but they had to. And so they get their sick care, they get all their wellness care, and then at 8 weeks, if they look good, they get spayed and neutered. And then it is up to that finder to find the homes. So the clinic does the veterinary care, gets them spayed. So when they go on Craigslist, they're spayed. And we expand the reach of the shelter because we're now leveraging a family that only has to place one litter of kittens, not a shelter that has to place all of them. And so they are doing now about 1,000 of those free to the public. And it's a really important program for keeping cats out of shelters and saving their lives. And the important thing is they get a graduation certificate at 8 weeks, because there has to be a very formal separation of free care point in time so that they're not coming back forever.
Just to piggyback on that quick, going back to one of the slides I shared, I just wanted to highlight again that the #1 intake type for cats in Michigan are strays. So again, look at your own data in your database. I mean, I think that kind of speaks for itself. Again, use that preventative tool.
Yeah, certainly, kind of that intervention program with kittens to, to be able to take them, if you can get them at that age and get them into homes, that's certainly very important, for us. And we regularly assess for that purpose, because it's just a wonderful opportunity. I think probably it's time to wrap this up. This really has been a fantastic discussion. I would love to keep going, but we're probably already a little over schedule. I don't want to, impose on anybody's time any longer. I thank you so much to everybody on the panel. We truly are, speaking for myself, and I think all of our attendees, grateful for your expertise and your guidance. A big thank you to everybody who came from shelters and rescues, everybody who participated, who shared questions, who just, sat and learned and made themselves part of the discussion. We want you to walk away with some good data, some actionable solutions. It was very important to us putting this together to not just outline problems, but to look for ways to address them, because that's really what's going to be critical for us, is to confront the challenge honestly, and recognize that it's a big one, but to figure out what do we actually do about it. Just to wrap things up, in the next day or so, if you keep an eye on your inbox, you will be getting an email with a link to the recording of today's discussion. It's also going to include a 5-page handout with tools and some suggestions that we think will be really useful for you to get through, hopefully avoid a capacity crisis. And there's also a link to register for next month's webinar, which is about conversational adoptions. And I think that's really going to be a fantastic program too. And I highly encourage everybody to be part of that. And I think, unless anybody has anything else, without further ado, it is probably time to get back to it. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody.